She stepped into the luxurious boutique in downtown Chicago, carrying with her every dollar she had saved over nearly 3 years. All for the sake of one small dream. A handbag, something that wasn't secondhand, wasn't on sale, and wasn't bought simply because it was cheap. A single gift for herself, marking the day her younger sister had passed away. But the moment the sales associate's gaze dropped to her worn-out shoes, the shirt she had ironed twice that morning, and the faded canvas bag slung over her shoulder, their polite smiles began to fade until they disappeared entirely. One of them, a blonde with her hair pulled so tight it looked painful, let out a small, sharp laugh. "She's just here to look," the woman whispered to her colleague, her tone dripping with mockery. The kind who takes pictures of designer bags to post online before going home to a pile of coupons. The other, a slightly older brunette, crossed her arms and eyed Emily from head to toe, as though spotting a stain on velvet. "We have a clearance section in the back," she said, forcing a sugary, false smile. "You might find something more suitable there." Emily Carter tightened her grip on the strap of her bag, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. It wasn't the first time she had been judged, but this time was different. This time, she had prepared herself. She knew she didn't belong in a place like this, knew that the polished marble beneath her feet had never been touched by shoes as worn as hers. Yet she had saved every penny from her accounting job at a plumbing shop, cutting back on everything: her morning coffee, her weekend movies, even the winter coat she desperately needed. Every time she thought about giving up, she looked at the photo of Lily, her sister, laughing by Lake Michigan 3 months before she died. Emily had promised, right there in that hospital, that she wouldn't live small anymore, that she would give herself permission to feel worthy. "I'd like to see that bag," Emily said, pointing to the caramel-colored purse inside the glass case. Genuine leather, classic design, nothing flashy. That was the one. Both clerks exchanged a look, then turned back to her. "That's part of our premium collection," the blonde said, lips pressed tight. "I know," Emily replied, her voice steadier than what she felt inside. "I still want to see it." The brunette let out a short laugh that she tried to mask with a cough. "Maybe you should come back when you have a more appropriate budget." "I have the money," Emily said, pulling out her wallet, her hand trembling slightly. Inside the clear plastic sleeve was Lily's photo, a reminder of why she was here. She hadn't come to beg. She had come because she deserved to. But the next words stopped her cold. "Sweetheart," the blonde sneered, "even if you scrape together enough from selling your blood or working double shifts, that bag isn't for someone like you. It's for women who step out of cars worth your 5-year salary. You know, people who belong here." Emily froze, her wallet half open, her eyes burning. She turned away, unwilling to let them see her cry. Not here, not again. Just 3 steps from the door. She heard it, the deep, resonant hum of an engine powerful enough to make the glass tremble. A black Mercedes glided to the curb, its windows tinted so dark no one could see inside. The door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a slate-gray suit that fit like armor. His movements were quiet, yet carried undeniable weight. He opened the rear door, and in that instant, Emily froze. Michael Raines stepped out, her husband. The man no one in Chicago's underworld dared to call by name. A man who owned not only buildings but the secrets buried beneath them. And he was walking in, for her. If you've stayed with us this far, thank you for watching Underworld Love Stories. Stories like Emily's and Michael's aren't just fiction, they mirror something deeply real. About self-respect. About how a small act of defiance can reclaim dignity in a world that constantly judges. If you felt that, take a moment to subscribe, and share this video so we can keep telling stories that touch the heart every day. And where are you watching from? Leave a comment below wherever you are in the world so we'll know just how far these stories have traveled. Thank you. And we'll see you in the next episode of Underworld Love Stories. Michael Raines stepped through the boutique's glass doors in near silence. He didn't need to raise his voice or flaunt his presence. The air itself seemed to tighten around him, The overhead lights reflected off his polished black shoes, the charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection, and the winter night depth of his eyes scanned the room until they found what mattered: Emily. She stood there, half turned toward the exit, one hand still on the door handle. For a long second, they simply looked at each other. No words. Yet he understood. Michael always understood her better than anyone. And that almost imperceptible nod from her, that was all he needed. He walked toward his wife slowly, not glancing left or right. But everyone could feel it, the shift in the air, like static before a storm. The two clerks, Sophie and Erica, stood frozen. Sophie whispered in shock, "Oh my God, is that him?" Erica took a half step back, her voice barely a breath. "Be quiet. Stay calm." Emily let go of the door handle and straightened her back. She no longer felt the chill or the shame, only the heavy silence of years spent being judged, and beneath it, something tender, almost sorrowful. Michael stopped in front of her, his voice low, but carrying the weight of quiet authority. "Weren't you supposed to meet me at the diner?" "I was just passing by. Thought I'd take a look," she replied, exhaustion seeping into her tone. His eyes moved around the room, landing on the bag in the glass case. His gaze shifted swiftly from it to the two women still frozen behind the counter. Sophie forced a trembling smile. "Good afternoon." "'Tis, sir. It's such an honor. We're so happy to—" "Who manages this store?" Michael interrupted, his voice calm yet edged with something far more dangerous. A balding man in his 50s hurried out from the back like a rabbit sensing a wolf's breath. I'm Richard Hammond, the branch manager. We had no idea if something's upset you." "Des, sir. I sincerely apologize. I'd like to see the ownership papers," Michael said, his eyes never leaving the man. Excuse me. The ownership documents for this business. If you're unsure, my lawyers can request them formally, but we both know this will be quicker if you bring them now." Hammond went pale, stumbling back toward the office, and returned minutes later with a leather portfolio. His hands shook so badly that a few sheets slipped to the floor. Michael opened it, flipping through with the ease of someone who already knew what he would find. "Meridian and Company, this branch is under Blakemore Holdings. Blakemore was acquired in 2019 by Rains Consortium." He looked up, "Which means it's my company. I own 42% of it." Sophie's face turned ghost white. Erica looked as if the blood had drained from her veins. "And the woman you just called someone who should only window shop?" His voice was slow, deliberate, every word cutting like glass. "That's my wife." The store fell so silent that every shallow breath could be heard. "I heard everything from outside," Michael went on, still in that dangerously polite tone. "The talk about free looks, about selling blood, about who deserves to walk through these doors." Erica burst into tears, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Sophie stammered. We didn't know. That's the problem," he said quietly. "You never know until power makes you behave." He turned to Richard. "Fire them. Effective, immediately." "Yes, Mr. Rains. Right away." "Wait," Sophie stumbled forward, nearly pleading. "Please, I have student loans. I need this job." Michael opened his wallet and pulled out a check. 3 months' pay, double what the policy allows. "Consider me generous, but if you're still standing here a minute from now, I'll reconsider." She held the check as if it burned her fingers. The two women left the store, heads down, their steps unsteady. Michael looked back at Emily, his voice softening. "The bag you wanted. They'll wrap it." "Michael," she whispered, but he had already turned to Hammond. "Charge it to her card. My wife saved all year for it. She'll pay." When Emily took the neatly wrapped bag into her hands, what she felt wasn't victory. It was something hollow, like the ashes of something that had just burned out. The handbag rested neatly on Emily's lap as the Mercedes glided through the streets of Chicago. The golden-orange light of late afternoon, spilling through the windows like faded strokes of paint. Michael sat beside her, one hand loosely on the steering wheel, his gaze steady yet calm. as if what had just happened were nothing more than a trivial interruption in the long, controlled rhythm of his powerful life. But inside Emily, everything was still trembling. She no longer looked at the bag. It sat there, beautiful as the dream she once had, yet heavy as a stone. She turned her face toward the window, fingers clutching the edge of her sleeve, the sting of humiliation still clinging to her, merely covered now by another layer, the sheen of power that was not hers, the power he had wielded to make others submit. When the car stopped in front of their building, the 42nd floor, overlooking Lake Michigan like a painting, Michael opened the door for her. Emily stepped out, her movements slow and silent, saying nothing until the penthouse door closed behind them, shutting out the hum of the city. The air smelled faintly of oak and red wine. Michael poured 2 glasses, setting one before her. "I know you hate being treated that way. I hate it even more," he said, his voice low and sincere. Emily looked at the glass but didn't touch it. "What you did today," she began softly, her tone barely a breeze across still water, "wasn't for me. It was for you." Michael lifted his head, a flicker of unease crossing his sharp eyes. "What do you mean? They insulted me. But what made you act wasn't my pain, it was that they didn't know who I was married to. You weren't defending me. You were defending your status." Michael was silent for a few seconds, then slowly sat down across from her. "I protected you." "No. You controlled the situation." Emily raised her face, meeting his gaze. "You walked in like a king, punishing those who dared to offend his consort." "I don't need a king. I need a husband." Michael leaned back, fingers interlaced. "You have me, but not the man I once loved." The words hung in the air, still and sharp. Emily took a breath and continued. "I loved you when you clumsily made noodles at 2 a.m, when you spilled oil across the floor and said nothing but, 'I'm sorry.' I loved the man who held me all night after Lily died, without asking questions, without trying to fix me, just holding me so I wouldn't fall apart. I didn't love the man who uses power to make others tremble, the man who throws checks like scraps to a dog, the man who makes a girl cry for losing her job instead of understanding why she behaved the way she did." Michael tilted his head, his expression darkening. "She humiliated you. And I survived it. I've survived worse. Not because of you, but because I'm strong. But every time you protect me, you steal the chance for me to prove it. Don't you see? Every time you use your strength, you make me smaller." Michael exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "So what do you want me to do? Stand by while they insult you? While you walk away with your head down?" "No. I want you to believe I can walk away with my head high." Emily rose and moved to the window, overlooking the city now glowing with evening lights. The world below shimmered like unfinished dreams. She turned back to him, her voice soft but firm. "I don't need you to stop the world for me. I need you to walk through it with me. No clearing the path. No threats. No vengeance. Just together." Michael stood too, but didn't approach. He only looked at her, love and helplessness flickering together in his eyes. "Do you think you can do that?" Emily asked. "Do you think you can stop being Michael Raines, the man the city fears, and simply be Michael, the man I once loved?" He didn't answer right away, but something shifted behind his gaze, a faint crack in the perfect ice of his authority, and that, small as it was enough for Emily to know there was still hope. Yet, hope, as she had learned, was something to be earned, not given. Emily stood by the window long after Michael had left the room, saying nothing more. The city below remained bright as it always was, its restless pulse unbroken, unaware that somewhere above it, a woman was feeling lost inside her own life. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, her tired eyes closing. In the darkness behind her eyelids, familiar images returned, vivid as if they had happened only yesterday. A long hospital corridor, pale fluorescent lights, and the sterile scent of disinfectant clinging to her skin. The steady beeping of a heart monitor echoed like the background rhythm of growing fear. Lily lay in the bed, her face pale, her short hair damp with sweat. her brown eyes still defiantly alive. She had always been that way, fighting harder than anyone believed she could. At only 19, Lily had endured more pain than most do in a lifetime. The accident happened on a rainy night. A drunk driver ran a red light. Emily could still remember the helplessness that gripped her when she got the call. When she ran frantically to the emergency room and saw her sister lying there so small, so fragile yet somehow smiling. That ugly blue shirt. "Sis," Lily whispered, her voice rough and broken. "You look like a birthday candle that went out halfway." Emily laughed through tears, holding her sister's hand cold, tiny fingers still curling around hers, just like when they were children. "Lily," she said softly, "you're going to be fine. I'm here." But deep down, Emily already knew. The doctors hadn't sugarcoated it. Surviving had been a miracle. Recovery was impossible. Her organs were failing. She wouldn't make it. On the final night, they sat together. Just the two of them in that small, silent room. Lily smiled, faint but full of life. "You know what I hate the most?" "What?" Emily whispered. "You keep saying sorry." Lily's eyes locked on hers, serious in a way that made her seem far older. "You apologize when you walk into a room, when you say the wrong word, when you buy something that costs more than $5. You've spent your whole life shrinking yourself so you don't bother anyone. Don't live like that anymore." Emily wanted to speak, but her voice broke. Lily squeezed her hand tighter, summoning the last of her strength. "I know life isn't fair, but you're still here. I'm not. You have to live bigger, stronger. Don't apologize for existing. Don't take the easy path. And never let anyone make you feel unworthy of something beautiful." Emily wept, nodding, unable to promise aloud, but making a vow in her eyes instead that she would not let this pain be meaningless, that she would step out from the shadow of fear, smallness, and lowered heads. That night, Lily was gone, quietly, as if she had only fallen asleep. Emily didn't scream or wail. She simply packed up the hospital room in silence, hugged Lily's favorite hoodie to her chest, and walked out into a freezing December morning. The wind struck her face like a slap, but she stood tall, because that was what Lily would have wanted. Now, standing in the cold expanse of the penthouse, surrounded by luxury, with the city lights glittering beyond and the expensive handbag sitting nearby, Emily realized how far she had drifted from that promise. She had let Michael's power define her worth, had allowed his wealth to deliver justice on her behalf. But that wasn't what Lily had wanted, and it wasn't what Emily wanted either. She reached out and touched an old photograph on the shelf, Lily laughing, her hair wild, holding up a melting ice cream cone. A moment of pure, unbought freedom. Emily closed her eyes. Once again, she made a promise, but this time, she would keep it. The next morning, Emily woke earlier than usual. The first sunlight had yet to slip between Chicago's towering buildings, when she had already finished brewing a pot of strong coffee and slipped on the old wool cardigan that Lily had once chosen for her during a long-ago winter. She didn't turn on music or the television. She simply sat alone in the vast kitchen of the penthouse, writing in her notebook in neat, deliberate strokes. Under the soft light, the words appeared with quiet clarity, like the whispered vows of a woman determined to reclaim her own life. By noon, she called Lisa Nguyen, her closest friend since college. Lisa, a Vietnamese-American fashion designer, had studied in New York before returning to Chicago to open a small custom studio that had been forced to close during the pandemic. The two had once dreamed of doing something together, but life, as it so often did, had pulled them in different directions. When Emily suggested meeting, Lisa agreed without hesitation. They met at a small cafe near the pier, the same place they used to go back when they shared a basement apartment and lived off instant noodles. Emily spread a plan across the table. It wasn't a traditional business plan, no detailed budgets, no 6-month growth projections. Just one idea: to build a workshop for women who had been hurt, not a place to teach them how to survive, but a place to help them stand tall, graceful, and seen. A warm space where every stitch and seam could become proof of resilience. Lisa read in silence, then looked up, something profound flickering in her eyes. "You're serious?" she asked. Emily nodded. "I want to create something that truly matters. Not for Michael, not for money, for Lily, and for myself." Lisa leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You know, I was ready to quit, right? After the pandemic. After moving my studio 3 times. I thought maybe this industry wasn't for me. But there's one thing I never stopped doing: drawing." She opened her phone and showed Emily her latest sketches. Coats with soft lines, dresses designed to flatter every body type, scarves made from leftover fabric but paired with an artist's sense of color. Emily picked up one of the sketches and smiled. "I think Stitchline Studio should start here." The name came from their shared story, the tears in their lives, stitched back together with kindness, creativity, and community. They started in an old garage in Logan Square, once a storage room for a closed bakery. Michael knew nothing at first, and Emily wanted it that way. She needed this to be hers alone, untouched by the influence of power or the shadows of the world her husband was trying to leave behind. Lisa brought the first sewing machine, while Emily went door to door to fabric stores, asking for scraps and convincing owners this was a community project. Slowly, the scraps became dresses. The design whiteboards turned into timesheets for the first 3 women they hired: a single mother who had survived abuse, a young woman who had dropped out of school due to depression, and a middle-aged worker laid off after 20 years in a factory. Stitchline wasn't a fashion brand. It was a declaration, a way for Emily to honor the promise she made to Lily, one day at a time. Every time she stepped into the workshop, hearing the steady hum of sewing machines, Lisa's soft laughter, or the cheerful greetings of women learning again to believe in themselves, she knew she had made the right choice. And though the road ahead was long and uncertain, with obstacles she couldn't yet foresee, at least with every straight, steady stitch, Emily was sewing her own life back together. Emily had never imagined herself sitting on the other side of an interview table, much less being the one to offer someone else a chance to start over. Yet on a soft spring morning, as she stood inside the small space of Stitchline Studio, watching sunlight stream through the dusty window panes, listening to the steady rhythm of sewing machines and the faint aroma of fresh coffee drifting from the tiny kitchen corner, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. That week, they had pinned a simple hiring notice on the board at the local women's support center. No degree required, no prior experience, only a heart willing to learn and hands that still wanted to create something. At the bottom of the page, Emily had written her final line: "No one is born with opportunity, but we believe everyone deserves at least one." 3 days later, they received more than 20 handwritten applications. Some were slanted and shaky, some misspelled, some written on old-school paper, some only a few trembling lines long, but every sheet carried something honest and aching. Emily and Lisa read through them one by one, sometimes wiping away tears. One woman had survived 3 winters in a homeless shelter. Another had just completed rehab after 6 years. A young girl of 19 wrote that her mother had left when she was 10 and that she had done every job she could, waiting tables, washing dishes, babysitting. Emily remembered one line scrawled unevenly across the bottom of a page: "I've never been chosen for anything." They decided to meet every applicant. No conference tables, no bright lights, just an old wooden desk, 2 cups of tea, and a single question: "What do you want for yourself?" Many froze, unsure what to say. Some fell silent. Some cried. One woman named Maribel, somewhere in her 40s, said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Just as Emily was about to close her notebook, Maribel spoke in a low, cracked voice, as if words had been waiting years to be released. "I just want to wake up in the morning and have a reason to get dressed." That sentence stayed with Emily for days. They accepted 7 women in their first group. Each carried a different story, a different wound, something unhealed. And Stitchline began to turn into more than a place for stitching clothes. It became a place to mend the tears inside their lives. Emily didn't just teach how to use a sewing machine. She taught how to write an email, manage time, say thank you and sorry at the right moment. Lisa taught color pairing, sketching, how to look at an old piece of fabric and imagine it becoming something beautiful. Every week, they held what they called open circle talks, no lessons, no agenda, just sharing. Some days, the workshop fell silent as someone spoke of being beaten so badly she broke her arm, but still went to work for fear of being fired. Other days, the room filled with laughter over a crookedly sewn dress that someone proudly called a creative twist. Gradually, Emily became the center they all leaned on, not a boss, but something between a sister and a quiet leader. She had no private office, no leather chair, just a toolbox she always carried, and a gaze that saw every woman as someone who mattered. One afternoon, a young girl returned after lunch and placed a bracelet on Emily's desk, made of leftover buttons. "You don't remember me," she said softly. "But last year I was in line for clothes at the charity fair you sponsored. Today, I finished my first dress. Thank you for believing in me before I knew how to believe in myself." Emily still kept that bracelet. It wasn't expensive or intricate, but it was proof that what she was doing was no longer a project. It was a way of living. Stitchline couldn't save the whole world, but for every woman who walked through its doors, it stood as proof that opportunity isn't a privilege reserved for those born into comfort, but a reward for those brave enough to begin again. And Emily, through the scars she once carried, had become the one to open that door. One April morning, Emily walked into the studio with a rare lightness in her chest. The first product review had wrapped up the night before, and a small shop in Wicker Park had agreed to place an order for 30 linen dresses for the summer. Not a huge contract, but the first step on the path she and Lisa had sketched out with sweat and faith. She carried a box of waffles and coffee for the team, planning a small breakfast to celebrate. Yet when she entered the little office tucked at the back of the workshop, her eyes were immediately drawn to a cream envelope neatly placed on her desk. No one was in the room. Lisa was at home caring for her sick mother, and the seamstresses had not yet arrived. The door was still locked as usual. Emily walked over and opened the envelope. Inside was a check made out to Stitchline Studio. The amount written in words, $25,000. Beneath the signature there was nothing remarkable. Only a short handwritten line in black ink, from a friend of Michael's. Her heart skipped a beat. She had not told anyone besides Lisa that she was Michael Raines's wife. And even Lisa had never pried into the details of her husband's past, only that he was influential. She lifted the check. The paper felt slightly thicker than usual. The corners cut with an odd precision, and a faint scent of cologne lingered masculine. Sharp, too distinctive to be generic. She put the check back in the envelope, locked the office, and called Michael. He picked up almost instantly. "Emily, I just got a check. $25,000. No sender name. Only a line that says, 'From a friend of yours.'" Michael was silent for a few seconds. When he spoke, his voice had changed. "Do not touch it. Put it back in the envelope and lock it in the safe for now. I'll come by." Half an hour later, Michael arrived, accompanied by Marcus Hale, the trusted aide Emily had only met a few times. Marcus was tall, dark-skinned, taciturn, with eyes that had seen more than they should. He opened the envelope and examined the check carefully. "The paper isn't standard check stock. The ink's texture is uneven. This is counterfeit." Emily looked at Michael. "Who sent it, and why?" Michael folded his arms and fixed her with a tense stare. "Victor Cole." The name fell like a slab of ice. Emily had heard the name once, when she accidentally overheard Michael and Marcus talking a name from the past. Someone who should not be resurfacing. Michael continued. "Victor is setting a trap. If you deposit this check into the company account, whether by mistake or on purpose, he can manufacture charges of money laundering or financial fraud. Then the press gets involved. The FBI will find reasons to investigate. Stitchline collapses, and your name will be the one dragged into trouble instead of mine." Emily tightened her grip, her throat dry. "Why target me?" "Because I'm stepping away from the system," Michael said quietly. "And you are the only weakness he can reach." The air in the room thickened. A smoldering anger rose in Emily's chest, not at Victor, but at the world she thought she had escaped. At the long shadow Michael still cast, even as he tried to step back. She looked at the check on the desk. An inanimate thing carrying a clear message. You may have a dream, but you may not build it yourself. Not while I am still here. Michael placed a call to his lawyer to have the check sealed and to notify the authorities. Marcus stood guard at the door, eyes scanning every movement outside. Emily was silent. The thought that circled her mind was no longer fear but resolve. If Victor Cole wanted to send a message, she would answer, but not with violence or power. She would respond with what he would never understand. A woman who had lost too much and had nothing left to fear is the most dangerous person of all. That night, when Emily returned to the apartment, she sensed that something was wrong. It wasn't because anything had been moved or the door was ajar. Everything was exactly where it should be. Neat and quiet as always. But the air felt different, as if an invisible chill had slipped in and settled over the doorknob, the curtain, even the scarf she had forgotten to fold. Michael came home not long after. He stepped inside, coat still on, eyes sharp with alertness. "What happened?" he asked. Emily looked up from her notebook, her voice steadier than she expected. "I think someone's been here. Not a thief. Just someone leaving a sign." Michael placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression shifting instantly. He pulled out his phone, signaling for her to stay still, and within 15 minutes 2 men from his private security team arrived. They swept through the apartment, checked the cameras, electronic locks, windows, and vents. A tiny tracking device no larger than a nail head was found inside the living room clock. It wasn't transmitting live, but had stored motion and audio data, enough to record every conversation over the past 5 days. Emily went still. The sense of violation didn't come from being spied on, it came from knowing someone had stood in the same space where she'd written letters by hand, cried for Lily, laughed over funny videos from Lisa. The most private moments of her life were no longer hers. Michael stared at the device as though he could crush it with his bare hands. "Victor's crossed the line," he said quietly. "He's not just threatening anymore. He's closing in." Emily clenched her fists. "Because of who I am or because of who you are? Both," Michael replied, turning to Marcus, who had just arrived and was connecting his laptop to the security system. "I want to know who's been in this building in the last 24 hours. Who touched the security network? And who planted this?" Marcus nodded, fingers flying across the keyboard. Meanwhile, Emily stood by the window, staring down at the glittering city below. But the lights no longer felt safe. She could feel herself being pulled back into a world she had tried so hard to leave, a world of shadows, where power was bought with fear. Michael stepped up beside her, calm but firm. "From now on, I'm assigning protection. Every time you leave the studio or the apartment, someone will be there. No one gets near you." "No." Emily turned toward him, eyes hard. "I won't be a prisoner of protection. This isn't imprisonment. It's survival," he said, voice low but restrained. "Victor isn't just an old boss. He's ruthless, without limits. If you get hurt, he wins. I won't let that happen." Emily looked into his eyes and saw what he wasn't saying, the guilt. She knew he blamed himself, because no matter how far he tried to step from the past, it was still collecting its debts. And this time, she was the one paying. Marcus looked up from the screen. "A car's been showing up outside the building 3 nights in a row. No plates, tinted windows. Stays about 20 minutes. Then leaves. Never enters. Never contacts anyone." Michael narrowed his eyes. "Fake registration? None. It's unregistered. Could be a scrubbed vehicle or a short-term rental used for surveillance." A shiver ran through Emily. "They know everywhere I go?" Marcus nodded. "If we don't stop them soon." "Yes." Emily inhaled deeply, then exhaled. "We're not running, but I need to know everything, who's involved, why Victor's doing this, and I need to decide how I face it." Michael's expression softened, and he nodded. "I promise. But let me protect you first, the way I know how. Then, if you still want to fight, we'll fight together." And in the quiet glow of the room, surrounded by security equipment and flickering data streams, Emily understood that every dream came with a price. She had just never realized that the cost of hers would be the very freedom she thought she had finally earned. The message arrived at 3:17 in the morning. Emily woke the moment her phone buzzed, her heart pounding against her ribs. On the screen was a short text from Lisa. "The studio's on fire. The police are on their way." She didn't bother changing clothes or tying her hair. She ran out of the apartment, down the elevator, her thin coat fluttering behind her in the chill of the early April air. Michael followed without a word, driving so fast the streets blurred beyond the windshield. When they arrived, the sight before her cut deep into her chest. The small workshop between two old storefronts had been extinguished, but smoke still rose from the charred gray walls. Part of the roof had collapsed, the windows shattered, the interior dark and smelling of burnt cloth and ash. Fire trucks lined the street, hoses coiling across the pavement like silver snakes. Lisa stood across the road, wrapped in a thin blanket handed to her by a firefighter, her face pale, hands still trembling. The moment she saw Emily, she ran forward and clung to her like a child who had barely escaped death. "I left less than an hour ago," she whispered, voice breaking. "I was going to come back for my notebook." The fire spread so fast. If I had stayed. Emily couldn't let the thought finish. She held Lisa tightly, then walked toward the blackened remains of what had once been their dream. The sewing machines were charred, fabric racks collapsed, design sketches burned to thin flakes of carbon. The wall that once carried their motto, "We stitch ourselves back together," was nothing more than smudged remnants of smoke. She stood there amid ash and steam and the sharp sting of burnt wood, feeling as though she had lost someone she loved all over again. Victor didn't need to send a message. This was the clearest one of all. Emily didn't cry. She didn't scream. But something inside her cracked quietly, deeply, like glass under pressure. She stood for a long time as firefighters questioned her. Police took notes, and Michael wrapped his arms around her shoulders, trying to shield her from the world. "This is my fault," Michael said softly as they returned to the car. "No," Emily answered, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "This was his choice, but I will decide how I respond." Back home, she showered for a long time, washing the scent of fire from her hair, then slipped into Lily's old hoodie and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker on as if nothing had happened. Life carried on, indifferent, but inside her, the storm still raged. The next morning, Emily returned to the site. No one had asked her to. The police were still investigating. But she already knew. This was no short circuit. No accident. It was a warning. But she wasn't there to confirm it. She was there to begin again. When Lisa arrived, she froze in surprise at the sight of Emily sitting on the front steps, notebook on her lap, writing slowly, line by line. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making a list," Emily replied without looking up. "Everything we lost, and everything we'll rebuild." Her voice was steady. "We're not stopping. Stitchline isn't four walls. It's the people inside them. Those women still need a place to work, to live, to find their worth again. No one, not even Victor, can burn that down." Lisa sat beside her, wordless, pulled out her own pen, and began to write. They sat there until noon, surrounded by smoke and ash, by the hum of traffic and the wail of distant sirens. Two women rewriting their dream piece by piece. And from those ruins, Stitchline would rise again, not out of defiance, not for revenge, but because Emily had once made a promise, to herself and to Lily, that she would never bow her head again. No one can extinguish a heart that has once caught fire with hope. 3 days after the fire, Emily sat in her temporary home office, 3 neatly clipped folders laid out before her, and a steaming cup of ginger tea beside them. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but her gaze was clear, stripped of the panic that had haunted the earlier days. The words in her notebook mapped out something that looked like a battle plan, not a war of force, but of strategy. Victor Cole had chosen to fight in the language of power, money, influence, and fear. If she was going to fight back, she had to learn to speak that language too, but in her own way. Michael entered the room holding a copy of the insurance contract for Stitchline Studio. He set it down on the desk and looked at her for a long moment. "The insurance will cover everything," he said quietly. "But you're still refusing to use my money?" Emily shook her head without looking up. "I need this plan to be mine. If I let you put your name on it, anyone could say I'm just the shadow behind Michael Rains. But if I do this myself, no one can ever take it from me." Michael nodded. He knew that look in her eyes, the same look that had made him fall in love with her the first time they met. In a room full of polished faces where she had been the only real one, Emily handed Lisa the blueprint for the rebuilding plan. It wasn't just about reopening the studio, it was about expanding it, finding a bigger space that could hold at least 20 people, building an online order system, creating a media campaign that told the stories of every woman in the studio, humanizing the brand, not selling through design, but through people. Lisa looked at her, half doubtful, half in awe. "And you're doing all this with what? An old laptop and warrior spirit?" Emily smiled for the first time in days. "No. With Victor Cole's bank statement." Lisa frowned. "What?" "Victor owns an investment fund called Black Peak Group. That fund once backed a fast fashion chain named Rosalie. While reviewing our old contracts, I discovered Stitchline had received a small order from one of Rosalie's secondary fabric suppliers about 6 months ago, which means that, through 3 layers of intermediaries, part of Victor's money once paid for our work." Lisa let out a disbelieving laugh. Emily opened her laptop, scrolling through graphs and data. "If we can restructure Stitchline as a social enterprise, one that attracts angel investors and women's recovery funds, we won't just have money. We'll have visibility, protection, and a legal system behind us." Lisa nodded slowly, the full picture beginning to form in her mind. Emily continued, her voice low but steady. "I'll send open letters to 20 private investors. They don't have to be big, just the right ones. I'll tell Stitchline's story through images, through the voices of the women themselves. We won't ask for sympathy. We'll offer an investment with both financial and moral returns. And if they join us, we'll replicate this model in other cities." Lisa leaned back, closed her eyes for a moment, and whispered, "You're not the same woman who walked into that boutique anymore." Emily looked out the window. The city was still moving. But this time, she didn't feel dwarfed by it. She felt part of it aligned. Steady. "You're right," she said. "I'm no longer the girl who bowed her head under humiliation. I'm the woman who understands that change doesn't come from rage. It comes from endurance." Then she began typing the first email, word by word, her hands steady, her resolve unshaken. This was no longer about saving a sewing studio. It was an answer to everyone who had ever thought she couldn't, and a message to Victor Cole. Emily Rains doesn't fight with weapons. She fights by surviving. And this time, she would not lose. Michael sat in his car, eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of the Langston Hotel, where Victor Cole occupied a luxury suite overlooking Lake Michigan. The sky was gray, and rain drifted in soft streaks across the windshield, each drop sliding down like a quiet omen of what was about to unfold. In his hand was a thick envelope containing copies of the financial documents Emily had uncovered while tracing Victor's money. But this time, it wasn't Emily acting. It was him. And he knew that to end this, he would have to step back into the darkness he had fought so hard to leave. Marcus sat beside him, glanced at his watch, then gave a brief nod. 30 minutes? If you're not out by then. I'm coming in. Michael didn't respond. He opened the door and stepped into the rain. He didn't need a weapon, nor guards, nor force. He only needed his name, and the past Victor remembered all too well. The elevator opened onto the top floor, where 2 burly men searched him before letting him through. The suite was softly lit, heavy with the faint scent of cigars. Victor Cole sat behind a polished desk, crisp white shirt gleaming. smiling as though greeting an old friend. "Michael Rains. Never thought you'd be the one to call me first." Michael didn't shake his hand. He simply sat across from him. "I'm here to end this." Victor raised an eyebrow, his smile deepening. "And you think coming here alone, no gun, no men, is enough to end it?" Michael opened the envelope and placed the papers on the desk. "I don't need force. I have something you fear more than bullets. Attention. A financial investigation won't stop at me. It'll pass through every shell company, every anonymous transaction, every fund you thought untouchable. And when people start looking, they'll see not just me, but you." Victor smirked, lighting a cigar. "You're threatening me?" "No," Michael said evenly. "I'm giving you a way out." He leaned back, voice calm, deliberate. "I'll walk away from everything tied to the old system. Completely. I'll leave a vacuum. You can fill it. No one will stop you. I won't come back. But in return, you leave Emily alone. No surveillance. No interference. No reaching her in any way again." Victor was silent for a few seconds, exhaling a slow plume of smoke. "You love her that much?" Michael's eyes didn't waver. "No. I respect her too much to let you turn her into a casualty." The room went still, except for the rain tapping softly against the glass. Finally, Victor shrugged. "I could agree. But Michael, promises mean nothing in our world. That's why I brought copies of these files." Michael replied, "One is with my lawyer, another with the press. If anything happens to her, an accident, a fire, financial ruin, everything goes public. And this time, you don't have enough money to buy silence." Victor gave a thin smile, but the ease had drained from his face. "You've changed. You never used to talk this much." Michael stood, nodding slightly. "Back then, I only knew how to use a gun. Now I've learned that silence, when used right, can be louder than any shot." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "I'm not afraid of you, Victor. I just don't want Emily to fear any of us." Then he walked out, leaving behind a negotiation without weapons but heavy with consequence. Stepping into the rain, he felt the cold water run down his collar, washing away fragments of the darkness that had clung to him for so long. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from his past. He was using it to protect a future. Not his own, but hers. And that alone made everything he had ever done finally make sense. Emily did not tell Michael, nor Lisa, nor anyone else. Because this time she did not want to be the one protected. She wanted to confront the truth herself. Up close and unmediated. The note she left for Michael was 8 short words. "I need to end this my own way." And then she vanished from ordinary traces. No phone signal, no traffic cameras, no credit card activity, but she had not gone far. She was inside Victor's building, on the 21st floor of a cold office tower in the financial district. She wore a long gray coat with the hood up, thin leather gloves, and had hidden a small USB device in an inner pocket. No one suspected Emily Rains, the woman once humiliated for her worn shoes, could slip past 3 layers of security and into the working floor of one of the city's most dangerous men. Yet she was no longer the frightened girl she had been. She had lost too much to be afraid. Using an access card she had obtained from a janitor she'd befriended during the fund tracing work, she rode the elevator to the floor Victor used for private meetings. No nameplates, no labeled offices, just a long corridor bathed in warm yellow light and fitted with dark carpet. A maze for clandestine deals that left no paper trail. She knew precisely which door led to the internal office of Black Peak Group, Victor's shell company. Emily touched the handle gently and used a tiny device Marcus had once left in a drawer to bypass the electronic lock in less than 10 seconds. The door opened onto a dark room, lit only by the blue glow of a computer monitor. She slipped inside and closed the door as softly as possible, her heart pounding but her steps steady as if she had rehearsed this for months. There were no voices, no security cameras. Victor's arrogance had convinced him no one would dare penetrate his inner sanctum, and that arrogance was his weakness. Emily plugged the USB into the computer and launched the lightweight, stealthy program Lisa had helped her build. a program designed to copy accounting data, transfers, and documents related to money laundering and manipulative investments without leaving a trace. 10 minutes should be enough. But after 5 minutes, the corridor lights blazed on. Emily froze as the sound of polished shoes struck the carpet. Slow and measured, she killed the monitor, pulled the USB, and crawled behind a large filing cabinet. The door opened, and footsteps entered one man. A sigh. A familiar voice, not Victor's but his assistant. A man named Jaden, who had appeared in some of the photos Marcus had collected. He walked to the desk, opened a drawer, flicked through a file. Emily held her breath. She could not be discovered now because in just 5 more minutes, the data she needed would be securely copied. Jaden stopped as if sensing something, turned his head and scanned the room. A sliver of light from the glow of a phone's flashlight skittered across the desk and down to the floor. Emily closed her eyes for a second and gripped the USB. If found, there would be no way to call for help. She was utterly alone. Then Jaden's phone rang. He swore, glanced at the screen, and stepped out, closing the door behind him. Emily waited another 30 seconds, dashed out, reinserted the USB, and watched the progress bar crawl toward completion. Only 2 minutes remained, and she breathed slowly, eyes shut. When the notification showed the transfer was complete, she withdrew the device, shut down the system, and left the room like a breeze. She did not run. Instead, she walked with the calm gait of a night shift employee, steady and deliberate. Only when the elevator doors closed and the building began to recede did her hands finally begin to tremble. She did not know whether she had crossed a line too far. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She was no longer the woman waiting behind for rescue. She was the one acting. And the truth she carried in her hands would be her weapon not for vengeance, but to end everything once and for all. When Emily returned to the apartment at nearly 4 a.m, exhaustion struck her so hard her knees almost gave out as she closed the door behind her. But she didn't allow herself to rest, not while the device carrying the evidence lay in her inner coat pocket, and every passing minute could be the line between safety and discovery. Michael was still awake. He sat at the desk, shirt unbuttoned, hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, his eyes full of worry. When he saw Emily step inside, that look shifted instantly to anger, then softened into a flood of relief. He didn't ask where she had been. He spoke only one sentence. "You have it, don't you?" Emily nodded, took the USB from her pocket, and placed it on the table. All of Victor's system data transactions, hidden transfers, lists of shell companies, even internal logs he thought were erased. Michael picked it up without a word and walked straight into the adjoining office, where Marcus was already waiting by the laptop. Emily sank into a chair, feeling for the first time all night that she could still breathe. But the tension wasn't over. When Marcus inserted the device, the system immediately detected encrypted anomalies. The screen flickered with strange lines of code before going black for a second. All three held their breath. Marcus's fingers flew over the keys to neutralize the malware, while Michael quietly rested a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder, though he too could feel the cold sweat crawling down his back. The monitor blinked back to life, showing a single folder labeled Shadow Core. Marcus opened it, revealing a trove of PDFs, spreadsheets, videos, and internal voice recordings, all from the past 6 months. He glanced at Michael, then began uploading everything to the private server they had prepared in advance. One by one, the files decrypted and transferred into a multi-layered encrypted system, secure against any unauthorized access. But at 80%, the alert light flashed red. Marcus frowned. Someone's trying to trace the IP. Michael stepped forward. Block the signal. Cut the connection as soon as the transfer's done. How long? 3 minutes if we're lucky. Marcus typed furiously. Emily stood and approached, watching lines of code race across the screen like a duel between two unseen minds playing a deadly game of chess. The other side clearly knew someone had broken in and they were coming after the trail. Drop the non-essential files, Michael ordered. Keep only what incriminates him. Trim it down to speed it up. Marcus selected the 5 strongest pieces of evidence: a list of offshore wire transfers, an audio recording of Victor ordering an execution in his unmistakable low voice, and a video of him receiving cash from a state politician. At 97%, another warning blazed across the screen. "They've triggered a location trace," Marcus said sharply. "They know we're here. We have to pull out." Michael didn't hesitate. He yanked the USB, powered down the computer, unplugged every cable, and told Marcus to pack up the auxiliary drives. Emily stood still, calm but inwardly calculating. How much could they have seen? Marcus shook his head. "Not enough to identify us, but enough to know Victor just got hit." Emily nodded, her hand gripping the table edge. "Then we don't have much time. We need to send this data out before he can strike back." Michael agreed, his tone firm. "Tomorrow morning I'll meet with the lawyers. If anything happens to us, every piece of evidence goes to the FBI, the press, and at least 3 international watchdogs." Emily looked up at her husband, the man she had once questioned, once doubted, and realized they were no longer 2 people from opposing worlds. They were standing together before the final storm. She smiled faintly. Victor picked the wrong people to threaten. And though the sky outside was still dark, the light within that room was rising like the dawn of a new chapter, where darkness would no longer be the only definition of power. The news broke on a midweek morning when the city was still half asleep. The headline scrolling across the massive screen outside the central broadcast tower: Victor Cole arrested at O'Hare Airport on charges of money laundering, bribery, and interstate organized crime. Michael stared at the screen, his hand tightening around his coffee cup, his expression not one of surprise but of quiet acceptance, as if he had always known this was the inevitable end. Marcus entered from the hallway carrying a slim folder, the federal detention notice, and a preliminary list of the submitted evidence. Among them were 3 files obtained by Emily, filed under an anonymous source, but authenticated enough for the FBI to open an emergency case. Victor had been caught just as he was about to board his private jet out of the city. Federal agents escorted him down the metal steps, his face twisted in rage he could no longer contain, his silver hair disheveled, his designer coat unable to disguise the collapse of a man who had once believed power would protect him forever. The press swarmed like wolves, no sympathy, no defense, only the cold, unblinking gaze of cameras capturing the fall of an underground empire, undone by the very secrets it had hidden. Emily watched the broadcast from Lisa's small kitchen, her hands still dusted with flour from the dough they had been kneading moments earlier. When Victor's handcuffed image appeared on screen, she stood still for a long time. There was no gloating, no celebration, only a deep, quiet relief, like the stillness after a storm, when one can finally hear the wind breathe again. Yet she knew that even with Victor gone, there were wounds, remnants, and fears that would not vanish just because one man did. They needed time and choice. That afternoon, Michael sat across from Emily in the living room, under the soft gold light of the hanging lamp, the silence between them stretching for more than 10 minutes before he finally spoke, his voice low but steady, carrying the weight of a vow. "I'm walking away from all of it, not just the remaining connections, but the entire system, everything." Emily looked at him, saying nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I used to think I couldn't get out, that there were debts that couldn't be erased, people who couldn't be refused. But after what you did, after seeing you walk into the darkness without fear, I finally understood something. Not everyone with power is strong. Only those who choose to live right are truly strong." Emily nodded softly, her eyes glowing with a tenderness that was also resolve. "I don't need you to be a hero. I just need you to be free." Michael rose and moved to the window, where the city glowed under the fading light. "I'll sell every share in the 3 shell companies. Remove my name from every trust. I'll meet each person in the old network, face to face. There will be risk, some will fight back, but I'm not turning back." "And the ones who once followed you?" Emily asked, her voice quiet as air. "If they want out, I'll help them. If they want revenge, I'll face it. But I won't let any of it touch you again." In that moment, between two people who had once stood on opposite sides of light and shadow. There was an unspoken rebirth. Michael was no longer the powerful husband she had once distrusted, and Emily was no longer the woman who needed protection. They were two souls choosing each other not because of the past, but because of the future they were willing to build from the ruins. When Michael left the apartment to begin his own final reckoning, Emily watched him disappear down the hallway. She knew there would still be trials ahead, but she also knew that sometimes to begin a new life, one doesn't have to erase the past only to face it and choose differently. And for the first time, after everything, they were doing exactly that together. Nearly a month after Victor Cole's arrest and Michael's official withdrawal from the entire underground network that had shadowed him for years, Emily received a call from the insurance company. She hadn't expected it to happen so quickly, knowing how claims often stalled when criminal investigations were involved. Yet the representative made it clear, since no sign of fraud had been found and there was sufficient proof of deliberate sabotage by a third party, the compensation had been fully approved. Emily said nothing after the call. She simply gazed out the window where early summer leaves were turning a lush green, her heart filling with both relief and gravity. The losses she and Stitchline had endured could never be measured in money, yet this payment meant she could begin again from the ashes. She didn't want merely to rebuild the old studio, she wanted to resurrect it from its core, with a new name, a new spirit, a step far beyond anything she and Lisa had once dared to dream. Everline. The name had come to her in a dream, with Lily smiling from afar, her voice echoing like a memory. Don't just stitch the past back together, create something that lives forever. Everline joined Ever and Line, an unbroken thread connecting past and future, pain and hope. Emily shared this with Lisa one morning as they signed the lease for their new space in Fulton Market. No longer a cramped workshop wedged between two repair shops. It was a wide, sun-filled loft with white brick walls left raw and honest, high industrial lights hanging from open ceilings. A place where every stitch would carry a story. They weren't renting a workspace. They were building a refuge for women the world had forgotten, Lisa whispered as they stepped into the empty room. If Lily could see this, she'd be so proud. Emily nodded, eyes shining but dry. She can see it. I know she can. With the insurance funds, Emily invested in new equipment, a modern order management system, and a dedicated training area for women just joining. She didn't rehire everyone, some had already found stability elsewhere during the hiatus, but those who returned carried something precious, faith. They hadn't come back for work. They came back for Emily, and for the belief that this was a place where they were seen and valued. On Everline's opening day, there was no ribbon cutting, no press. Emily simply hung a wooden sign carved by hand. Every stitch tells a story. Listen, the women who entered weren't seeking overnight miracles. They were taking small, deliberate steps, guided by someone who believed in them when the world had turned away. Michael stood quietly at the back of the room, not as a man of power but as silent support, watching his wife greet each person with patience and grace. He was no longer the shadow behind her. He was the foundation beneath her. And when the late-day sunlight poured through the tall windows, glinting off the steady flow of people coming and going, Emily knew with a certainty deeper than ever before that she had not simply reopened a studio. She had stitched a lost dream back together and laid it on a new, unbreakable thread, one that not even fear could unravel again. 3 weeks after Everline officially reopened, the first light of morning poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling across the polished wood floors and the neatly lined cutting tables. Ready for a new beginning, Emily stood in the center of the space, holding a list of new applicants. They weren't big names or seasoned professionals in fashion. They were the ones turned away everywhere else. A woman newly released from prison for petty theft but with an extraordinary gift for handwork. A single mother escaping domestic violence who had lived in a shelter. A widowed woman in her 60s trying to feel useful again after her children had grown and left home. And a few others, each carrying their own cracks and scars. Lisa walked over and handed Emily a cup of tea. She glanced at the list and said softly, "You really want to take them all? Some of these women might make things difficult at first." Emily didn't hesitate. "I'm not looking for perfect people. I'm looking for people who need a chance. Because if Stitchline once gave us a second chance, then Everline has to be the place that gives it to them. That morning, they came in one by one, hesitant, with eyes that flickered between shyness and hope. Emily and Lisa didn't sit behind a desk or ask formal questions. There were no technical checklists or assessments. They only asked 3 things. Have you ever sewn before? Are you willing to start from the beginning? And do you truly want a new start? Sometimes the answers were stammered. Sometimes they came with tears. Sometimes only with a slow nod. But in each of them, Emily saw what she had once recognized in herself the day she walked into that luxury boutique years ago, wearing worn-out shoes and a fractured heart, the hunger to be trusted. She designed a 6-week training program, pairing each newcomer with an experienced former employee. No one was left behind. No one was judged for their first mistake. She set one rule: we don't ask about the past. We only talk about the future. One afternoon, Emily sat beside a woman named Carla, a former nurse who had lost her license after a medical error. Carla was learning to use an industrial sewing machine, and her stitches kept veering off track. Emily gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Mistakes don't make you weak. Refusing to fix them does. Carla broke down in tears, not from fear, but because, for the first time in years, someone believed she still had something to give. Day by day, the workshop filled with warmth. Like a quilt sewn together with patience, the women began to share their stories, laugh when their seams went crooked, and hug each other when finishing their first pieces. They were no longer invisible figures lost in social statistics. They were hands, 2 voices, human beings threading their lives back together. On a Friday afternoon, Lisa turned to Emily as she watched everyone cleaning up after their shift. Do you see how much this feels like Stitchline? Emily shook her head, smiling. No, Everline isn't Stitchline. It's the better part of what Stitchline left behind. And in that moment, amid the quiet hum of machines now silenced, the whistle of a kettle from the small kitchen, and the soft breeze drifting through the open windows, Emily knew she wasn't just giving out chances. She was mending faith not only in others, but in herself. Morning in the northern suburbs of Chicago no longer carried the rush of car horns or the press of hurried crowds. There was only soft sunlight stretching over white fences, the rattle of children's bicycles on the sidewalk, and the smell of roasted coffee drifting from a corner cafe. Michael Raines got out of bed at 6 o'clock, pulled on a gray t-shirt and a pair of worn cotton trousers, and stepped onto the porch to water the rose bushes Emily had planted the week before. Every morning, he did one thing and one thing only. He cared for what was still alive. No business calls. No unexpected meetings. No strangers at the door. He no longer carried a gun, a false ID, or the codes to secret bank accounts. In the 3 months since Victor Cole's arrest, Michael had completely withdrawn from the old network that had shadowed him for so many years. He sold his shares in every shell company, shut down 2 covert investment funds, destroyed all fake passports and alternate identities once used to deceive financial systems. He personally signed the documents severing every remaining tie to the organizations that once moved under names known only to those within. Marcus had been the last to stay by his side during that long process of dismantling the past, and when it was finally done, Michael let him go, granting the man who had followed him for over a decade the freedom to choose his own direction. They parted with a simple handshake. No need for words. You're just a regular guy now, Marcus said, half teasing. Michael smiled. For the first time in 20 years, that feels good. Around noon, he drove his old pickup to the neighborhood grocery, buying vegetables and a bag of bread flour. The shop owner, Mr. Sam, knew him only as the husband of the woman who ran Everline, and always slipped an extra pouch of herbal tea into his bag. No one here knew he had once commanded millions, that a single word from him could make the city's underworld tremble. They only knew him as a tall, quiet man with weathered eyes who always nodded in greeting when he passed. Michael didn't feel the loss of that other life. If anything, he was learning to savor its absence. He learned to bake his own bread, to read in the evenings, and to take Emily for walks along the lake when the sunlight softened. Their conversations were about the smallest things: a new flower blooming, a rare fabric design from Everline, a curious herbal tea recipe Lisa had been testing. No more shadows between them. No silences filled with the tension of midnight phone calls. One evening, as they sat together on the wooden porch bench, Emily looked at him for a long while before speaking softly. "You're not the man I met 10 years ago." Michael turned braid, waiting for her to continue. "You're better than that. You're the kind of man I never dared imagine I'd still be walking beside now." Michael said nothing. He only reached for her hand, holding it gently, the gesture quiet but certain. In his old life, he had believed power was the only way to protect what he loved. But now, stripped of everything, he understood that peace doesn't need to be defended by weapons. It must be nurtured through choice. Day after day, and every day since he left that world behind, he had chosen to stay. Not out of duty, but because he wanted to be an ordinary man living beside an extraordinary woman. No titles, no empires, no line between light and shadow. Just two people, living the way they had once dreamed of each other in the silence that had carried them through the most turbulent years of their lives. That morning, while reviewing the weekend orders at Everline, Emily received a thick cream-colored envelope delivered by express courier with no sender listed. She opened it with fingers still dusted with fabric chalk. Curiosity mingled with the quiet caution that had become second nature after years of surviving turmoil. Inside was a letter printed on fine textured paper, its heading embossed with a silver logo from one of the most prestigious conferences on business and social impact in the United States, the Meridian Women's Summit. Emily read each line slowly, her brows slightly furrowed as if afraid she might have misunderstood. She had been invited to be the keynote speaker for this year's opening session. Titled, "From Wounds to Creation: How Women Change the World Through Their Brokenness." The letter said they had followed Everline's journey from its rebirth, the campaign that recruited women from disadvantaged backgrounds, the mentorship program that rebuilt lives, and the quiet way Emily had built a brand not on publicity tricks, but on the steady grace of integrity. No one there knew that the founder had once been humiliated in a luxury boutique, had once broken into a Mafia office, and had once faced losing everything simply for doing what was right. But precisely because they didn't know, they saw what she truly wanted to leave behind, not her story, but her values. Lisa entered the room just as Emily sat motionless, staring at the letter. She glanced over it quickly and gasped, "Oh my God! Meridian! Do you know how many people dream of being invited to speak there? You've been chosen." "Emily?" Emily smiled faintly, her eyes still wide with disbelief. "I'm just a woman who's failed more times than she's succeeded, who's chosen silence more often than she's spoken. And now they want me to stand before a room full of powerful people?" Lisa sat beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "No, you're not that woman anymore. And they're not inviting you because of what you lost. They're inviting you because of how you stood back up." All that afternoon, Emily didn't respond to the invitation. She walked home along the familiar path to the lake, where she and Michael often stopped on Saturday evenings. She found him on their usual bench, a book in his hand and a cup of tea cooling beside him. When she handed him the letter, he wasn't surprised. He just looked at her for a long moment before asking quietly, "Do you want to go?" Emily remained silent for a while before answering. "I used to think I only wanted peace. After everything that happened, I thought keeping Everline steady was enough. But now I see if I've come this far just to stand tall again. Why not take one more step to help others do the same?" Michael nodded, a faint, knowing smile softening his weathered face. "Then go, not to prove anything, but to tell the story as it truly was." That night, Emily sat before her laptop, reopened the email, and typed a simple sentence in reply: "I accept. Because I believe the story of an ordinary woman can be a light for many others." She pressed send, her heart light as it had been the day she first stepped out from Stitchline's ruins. No more anger, no more resistance, only a quiet desire to share what had kept her standing when everything else had fallen apart. And when morning came, she would walk onto that stage, not as the woman who had once been humiliated, but as the woman who had chosen never to bow. A week before Emily was scheduled to fly to Washington to speak at the Meridian Conference, she received an invitation to a private fashion event held at the Waldorf Astoria, honoring designers and artisanal brands recognized for their creativity and human impact. The sender was a representative from Leclerc Boutique, a name Emily could never forget. The place where she had once been humiliated, simply for not looking wealthy enough to walk through its doors. When she reached the line that read, "We are honored to feature selected Everline designs during the event," her heart sank slightly. She set the letter on the table and quietly walked out to the porch, where Michael was tending to the vegetable garden. He looked up, already sensing that whatever she held in her hand carried weight. Emily sat on the step, fingers intertwined, her eyes distant, as if touching an old memory. "I don't know if I should go," she said softly. "Not because I'm afraid, but because I'm not sure I need to anymore." Michael smiled, plucked a sprig of basil, and placed it gently in her hand. "Maybe you don't, but maybe someone there needs to see you show up. Not for revenge, but to understand that it's possible to rise from the very place you were once brought down." On the night of the event, Emily chose a simple dress of her own design, a high-neck silhouette cut from mist-colored linen silk, understated and graceful. Pinned near her collarbone was a small silver brooch engraved with the word Everline. She came alone. She wanted to walk in by herself, just as she had the first time she entered Leclerc years ago in scuffed heels, except this time she carried no fear. The hotel ballroom shimmered with light, laughter, and the clinking of wine glasses, a swirl of satin gowns and tailored suits moving like a polished waltz. Yet when Emily stepped inside, the air seemed to still for a beat. Some recognized her from recent articles, others recalled seeing her in a short interview circulating online. A woman near the entrance spoke first, her voice filled with surprise and admiration. "Mrs. Rains, the founder of Everline? I've been hoping to meet you." Handshakes followed. Smiles, words of congratulations, and warm glances replaced the disdain of that day long ago. Then Emily saw her, the saleswoman who had once mocked her worn-out shoes. The woman looked older now, her dyed hair unable to hide the years, still dressed impeccably, but her eyes no longer carried the sharpness that had once cut so deep. When their gazes met, the woman stepped forward hesitantly, her voice small but sincere. "I don't know if you remember me, but if you do, I want to say I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Emily said nothing for a moment, not from anger, but because so many emotions came rushing back at once. Then she smiled, faintly, almost like a nod. "I remember, but I don't carry it anymore. We all have the power to change, if we choose to." The woman's eyes welled with tears as she clasped Emily's hand in silent apology. And in that simple touch, Emily felt every wound from that long-ago day, sewn shut not by pride, but by forgiveness. In the exhibit hall, a dedicated corner was reserved for Everline. On display were designs born from the resilience of women who had once been forgotten. Each dress carried a story stitched into its lining in the handwriting of its maker. "I once believed I was only good enough to scrub floors. Now I know I can create beauty. I thought I was too old to start again, but a thread never asks how old you are." Guests lingered longest at that corner, not because the designs were elaborate, but because each seam carried something deeply human. When Emily left the event later that night, the city was quiet. She stepped into the cool air, her dress brushing lightly against her legs. There was no music to see her off, no flash of cameras, but inside her, something had closed, not like a door slammed shut, but like a chapter gently finished. No anger, no ache, only peace, and a soft whisper rising from within, as if from her younger self. "Never let a single glance diminish the worth you've spent your whole heart protecting." When Emily returned home that night after the event at the Waldorf Astoria, she slipped off her heels, set her handbag on the table, and stepped out onto the back porch. The kitchen light cast a warm stripe across the wooden floorboards. Michael was sitting there, a cup of hot tea in his hand, and that familiar, gentle gaze in his eyes. She didn't need to say a word. He looked at her face and knew the old chapter had truly closed. Without applause, without a grand stage. Emily had settled a debt long carried in silence, not with power or fame, but with maturity and grace. On the tea table lay a small note she had written before leaving. Dignity costs nothing. Keep the change. A reminder. A soft epilogue to years that had passed through wreckage and renewal. Dignity costs nothing. Yet keeping it is the most precious act one can offer to oneself and to others. From an ordinary woman once humiliated for her appearance, Emily had become a symbol of resilience and compassion. She needed no revenge. Her success itself was the strongest answer. She needed no one to bow their head. She had chosen to walk upright. And she needed nothing back from the past. For she had built a future no one could take away. My dear friend, Emily's story is not a fairy tale. It is a true reflection of life. Perhaps you, too, have been judged by your appearance. Perhaps you've quietly endured pain no one ever noticed. But if you can hold on to kindness, persistence, and faith in yourself, light will always wait at the end of the road. How do you feel about Emily's journey? Does any part of it remind you of yourself or of someone you love? Share your thoughts below. We would love to hear your voice, because sometimes a single heartfelt comment can give someone out there a reason to rise again. If this story touched you, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel Underworld Love Stories to catch more moving, meaningful stories shared every day. Each story we tell is chosen to carry human values, empathy, and hope content that uplifts all ages and is entirely advertiser-friendly. Thank you for following Emily and Michael's journey to its very last moment. We wish you and your family good health, peace, and happiness, and may you always find light, even in the darkest of days. Goodbye for now, and see you in the next video.